Hey everybody, welcome back to BK's Bullets. Today we're going to talk about Batman No Man's Land Volume 4. Hey everybody, welcome back to BK's Bullets. As always, I'm your host, Brent Casina, and today we're going to be talking about Batman No Man's Land Volume 4. Now, before we jump into the review, let me please ask you to do one thing. Please subscribe. Helps me out, helps the channel grow, lets you know when I drop new videos, all the good stuff. So, Batman No Man's Land Volume 4. Here we are, finally at the end, the conclusion of this long Gotham City earthquake cataclysm No Man's Land saga. I have reviews on the No Man's Land playlist for all of the books in this saga in the new trade dress, the newer ones, I guess. Since these haven't been reprinted, they're kind of rare to see. So you may have a tough time looking for these if you like these stories or whatever. But rest assured, if you are a digital reader, they are always there for you to read if you really just want to read them, or you can wait for the omnibus to come out. I know there is a Road to No Man's Land omnibus that's out that collects Cataclysm and the Road to No Man's Land Volume 1 and Volume 2. There's a No Man's Land Omnibus Volume 1 that's doing Volume 1 and 2 of these trades, and then a second one that's going to do Volume 3 and Volume 4, I presume. So, I was not so hot on Volume 3 if you saw the last video in this series, and I've pretty much loved every book out of this. The only ones that I think were really not poor but lackluster were Road to No Man's Land Volume 2 and then the No Man's Land Volume 3, the one that precedes this. This one is a fantastic read. Volume 4 is fantastic. This is just pure escalation, and then by the time you get to the end of the book, everything's been set up so great with all the little things and stuff. The climax of the book with the Joker and Gotham and all that stuff is really well set up, and it's really clear why they were saving Joker to the end in terms of a showdown with Batman. Like, yeah, he was in a couple of stories here and there, but Batman was purposefully like keeping him at arm's length, and when they do confront each other, or whatever the Joker does at the end of this book, was really, really cool. I remember reading it when I read the first initial trades, like the one, there was 5-volume set. I know I always talk about this in every video, but I'm just letting you know my history with the book. But man, there was stuff in here in Volume 4 that I had never read yet that were never collected previously. You know, so obviously I didn't read it because I wasn't picking up the single issues in 1999 this was coming out. It's kind of a fun little thing to read this 21 years later, and they're talking about to Batman and Nightwing and Barbara Gordon about who they're going to spend the new Millennium New Year's with. So that's pretty fun. You know, Y2K and all that. Which I guess Gotham didn't have to worry about since there were no computers up and running other than Batgirl's computers. There's some great stuff in here. I mean, you got writers like John Ostrander, Greg Rucka, Chuck Dixon, Denny O'Neil doing a whole lot, Devin Grayson. You got art by Jim Balint, Dale Eaglesham. Who else is in here? Roger Robinson doing the Azrael stuff. You got Pablo Raimondi, Stephen Harris, Damian Scott, and Dale Eaglesham are doing like a whole lot of work in this book. It's amazing how many issues they both cranked out during this time period. I'm sure it must have been crazy for those two artists. And this Dale Eaglesham work, it's 20 years old. It certainly is very reminiscent of the stuff he was just doing on Shazam, or if you've read his JSA stuff, but it's safe to say that his style hasn't really changed that much. I think if it did change, it got a little bit more illustrative. Here's Dale Eaglesham with his patented like square-jawed dudes and muscly dudes, and the line work, maybe got loosened up a little bit when he did JSA, and now certainly I think he's doing more of this illustrative detail in his work, but he's just a phenomenal artist. To have him and then Damian Scott do, like, sometimes they do each an issue. Later in the back when they're doing the endgame issues, it seems like there's half and half, like one guy does one half of the issue and then switches over to, if Eaglesham does the first half, Damian Scott does the second, and then you get to the next part, and again, it's another first half by Eaglesham, second half by Damian Scott. Although they are two very different artists, by this time, you've been reading Dale Eaglesham and Damian Scott in, alternating volumes of the No Man's Land trades that you're pretty much used to, like, seeing their style of art. So it's not not quite that jarring by the time you're in volume 4. If you're just picking up only volume 4 and you haven't read everything else, it might be a little jarring. Like if this was a different event trade or something like that. But I'm like, if this is volume 4, you're probably more used to this style by then. So it's pretty phenomenal. There's some standout stories in here. I mean, there's a lot because a lot of these stories are relevant to the arc of No Man's Land, and they do tie together, and so they are important. So some of them I have read before in the old trades, but there's stuff like all the Azrael stuff in here I never read before. All the stuff with Catwoman, her issues, never read before. And then I can't remember if they're the Dale Eaglesham Zaz issues. There's like 2 issues in the front here. I don't know if those were in the old trades. I don't really remember those. So maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but they were a fun read regardless. I'm not calling out the particular issues and stuff because, as I've discussed in other videos in this series, like I think the way that they're publishing this in here is what must have been the publishing order, because you have, the stories jump from issue to issue by the same writer and artist. So Batman 572 is the second story in here. This is the first story with Damian Scott and Greg Rucka. This is the 2-parter with Two-Face and Renee Montoya, putting basically Jim Gordon on trial for Two-Face kidnapping Renee Montoya. Two-Face puts Jim Gordon on trial and blames him for that. But anyway, this starts in an issue of Batman and then continues into an issue of Detective Comics with the same writer and the same artist. So when I'm just saying there's issues in here, 3 or 4 arc, I'm not calling out the particular like comic book number or anything, because it's really, they don't tell you what it is as you're reading it. It's just up here in the table of contents. And then even in the back, they do have the covers and stuff, but unless you're like flipping through, like the covers are in the back, so you're not really recognizing that you're reading a new issue of a book until you get to like the title page or something, or there's the to be continued blurb that's in the bottom right hand corner of most end pages. But anyway, I gotta say the 2 standout stories in here are there's one issue here with Batman and Jim Gordon, and it's written by Greg Rucka, drawn by Rick Burchett. It's phenomenal. It is the climactic moment of these 2 men who have kind of been at odds, or not really at odds, but Gordon's been angry with Batman since the very beginning of the No Man's Land trades, because Batman disappeared for 3 whole months. And their whole conversation in here, in one issue, written by Greg Rucka, is phenomenal. It gets down to the core of who Batman thinks Gordon is and who Gordon thinks Batman is, and why there's resentment there. Even before No Man's Land, there's a line here about Gordon who says, you think I'm an idiot? You had a parade of pretenders come in here and you never bothered to talk to me about them. And there he's referring to, Batman getting his back broken by Bane, then Jean Paul Valley showing up and doing the whole Batman bit. Then Batman comes back, takes Jean Paul Valley down, and then immediately hands it over to Dick Grayson, and Gordon's still going, this is not Batman. And you gotta remember, like, that stuff happened in 1994, 93, 94, and this is 1999, so this is only 5 years previous that you had the Nightfall Saga when this was being published. So that's a pretty cool callback, when you're reading it, because you think it's much earlier, but in publishing history, it wasn't that long ago. It's like you talking about the New 52 reboot or something in Rebirth comics, or even if you're reading comics now, if you reference Rebirth, that was almost 5 years ago. So it's a pretty cool callback, even though it wasn't that long ago when they were writing this book. The second story that stands out, obviously, is the one called Endgame, which is the climax of the entire No Man's Land saga. Joker finally decides to show up and cause some real trouble. He goes up against Huntress and Petite, who is like the break-off guy of the Blue Boys, the GCPD, and Petite's kind of going power hungry, and he's sending guys out to fight the Joker, and the Joker's just shooting them all, or even worse, dressing him up as the Joker himself, and it's dark and it's snowing, and you see a guy with white face, green hair, and a purple jacket, and you're on the other end of a scope, you think it's a Joker. This guy's so crazy. He's taken every shot he sees of purple jacket and green hair, and he ends up killing his own soldiers and not even caring because he's so power hungry and kind of mad. And then you have this phenomenal action sequence where Huntress, this is drawn by Dale Eaglesham, is just like beating the crap out of these guys all by herself, like 12-1. And it's phenomenal issue. I really liked Huntress throughout the arc, but it wasn't of all the No Man's Land trades, but it wasn't until this issue here, Endgame Part 2, and then also the first issue where Victor Zsasz is here, and Huntress always kind of shows up with Leslie, the Batman's doctor friend, and I really liked her portrayal here. She's kind of like, her whole arc in No Man's Land is cool because it starts off as you kind of see her as like torn. She's mad at Batman, and then you realize in, I think it's book 2, that she's been acting as Batgirl at the same time. So in volume 1 you're reading Batgirl and Huntress, and they're not really linking up to say that they're the same person. And then when Cassandra Cain takes over, and I think in volume 2 as well, she's all mad about Batman and stuff, and it's like, I made that costume what it is. It doesn't mean anything without my actions. And there's also another standout issue is this like origin issue that's in the middle here. It's kind of showing what Bruce Wayne was up to right after the road to No Man's Land ends, this missing 3 months, and how Huntress decided to become this Batgirl because she was going out as Huntress and not having any effect. Nobody would listen to her. But you show up in a black outfit with big tall ears and a yellow bat on your chest, well, people start to pay attention and that myth becomes alive. Meanwhile, you have Bruce going down and hooking up all these bat caves, and then it seems like immediately recognizes that this new Batgirl is Huntress because of the way she fights. And then kind of tests her, and lets her prove herself to have his name, at least for the time being. Why that was in the middle of book 4 and not at the beginning of book 1 or 2 or 3, I don't know why they chose to tell this story when they did. I guess because they wanted to have this new Batgirl be a mystery, right? You've got this moment of people asking Bruce, like, where the hell have you been for the last 3 months? And it's never really picked up until this last, this one-shot story that's in the back here. There's definitely, a couple moments in here that were a little weird, like the whole thing with Tim Drake being rescued. That issue happens after the end game, the end of No Man's Land. You've read the end of No Man's Land, and then you have this kind of flashback in this Robin issue of how Tim Drake got rescued. And it was really jarring because in the Endgame storyline, it takes place over Christmas Eve and New Year's Day and all this stuff. And there's a moment with Tim and his dad having Christmas dinner. And you're going, wait, I remember the end of Volume 3 ending on this kind of like, oh shit panel as Tim realizes that his dad pulled all the stops and got all this media attention about this missing teenager, Tim Drake, who went into No Man's Land. And you're just going, did that ever get resolved? And then you flip through to the end and go, oh, that story's coming up. So that was kind of weird here. Why, I don't know why they put that in the very back after everything. Like, I feel like you could have put it before the Endgame storyline began, but I guess they had their reasons if they decided they were only putting it in publishing order instead of like a true reading order. But it's not that bad. It's just like the one loose end that really gets wrapped up after the end game, the final act or whatever. There's some other things in here that's kind of weird. Like, you see the same moment of Catwoman delivering these files to Bruce 3 different times. You see it in pages of Catwoman, you see it in pages of Azrael, and you see it in pages of, I think it's like Detective Comics or Batman Chronicles or something. But it's the same dialogue delivered 3 different ways, and it's like, I've read this 3 different times, I don't need to be reading it again. Even though it's a good story, like the first time you read it, you're like, wow, this is cool. And then the second time you're like, okay. And then by the third, you're like, all right, I'm skipping ahead a little bit here because I've really read the same thing again and again and again. So maybe they all came out in the same week and they assumed that not everybody's picking up all the No Man's Land books, and this was a really important moment for the end, I guess. That was kind of weird. The other thing too is I didn't realize there's a story with Azrael here called Evacuation, or it's not Evacuation, is it? No, it's a little bit later. I'm sorry. It's this one here. Flipping into Denny O'Neill's writing it. You got Roger Robinson on pencils, James Pascal on inks. So after Catwoman decides to deliver the disc, and you read that story for the third time, you've read an issue of Azrael before working with Catwoman. You read some issues with Catwoman, and then you go back to Azrael, and this is called Presence of Mind. And you have Batman talking to Azrael and say, take Batgirl with you, stop the Joker, he's hunting babies, that kind of thing. And he fights Santa Claus, or a guy dressed up as Santa in this Lex Luthor camp. And, he saves Mercy and Batwoman from an explosion. It's a really sweet moment at the end. They're exchanging presents, and these two, like, emotionally crippled people, Batgirl and Jean Paul Valley, exchanging presents is kind of touching. But you don't realize that this is the same moment you read again later in the Endgame saga, the 4-part saga, until like 3 issues later, and they're referencing it, and you're like literally seeing the same image as well, and you're going, wait, is that the same moment I just read like pages ago? And yes it is. This one is drawn by Dale Eaglesham, not Roger Robinson. They both do it fairly well. Like I can't say I prefer one to the other. The Azrael story is more about the connection between the two characters of Azrael and Batgirl. This one is purely like there's a setup in the beginning of Endgame Part 1 where Bruce gives him this mission again, and then by that time you're reading it, you're going, oh yeah, okay, I remember that a couple issues back. And this is just following up on that they went to go protect Luthor's camp to search for these babies that Joker has kidnapped. But the ending of Endgame, man, just this last bit is just so tragic and just kind of like really gut-wrenching. That is the true ending of No Man's Land, this big like oh no moment of tragedy that is just like the capstone of all tragedies. So you've had the tragedy of Cataclysm and a lot of people dying in there with buildings falling on them. You've had the cataclysm of the failure of the system of the United States and society to keep Gotham City alive during Road to No Man's Land. And then as you're reading No Man's Land, you're seeing the failures of human beings as people. And then to have this personal tragedy for Jim Gordon to happen at the very end is just gut-wrenching. And I thought it was really interesting the way they kind of resolved it with, Gordon and the Joker and their showdown, and just kind of like, him at his wit's end going like, this guy, he just did this to me. He shot Barbara. All the other people he's murdered. We're still in a state of no man's land. Like, theoretically, Gordon could have shot the Joker and probably faced no charges for it because they're still in a lawless state by then. But, it's interesting. Obviously, the Joker shows up again, so I don't have to spoil that for you. But, it was cool. And then the whole ending to, like, No Man's Land proper, in terms of, like, how Gotham gets out of this predicament, is in this epilogue issue. That's the very last issue in the book. And it just kind of reveals, what the whole endgame was, what... You kind of know what Lex Luthor wants, because he's trying to rebuild Gotham, and he's trying to gain all this real estate, and then Batman... Like, they refer to his plan all throughout this whole volume. They don't spell it out until the very, very end what Batman's plan was. And I can't say it was, like, worked out perfectly. It's pretty, like, standard for Batman. But it's pretty cool how he sets it up with Lucius Fox and, the stuff he was doing as Bruce Wayne, or what people thought Bruce Wayne was doing during this whole time. And how he like clues different people onto different trails in order to stop Luthor from basically like a land grab, a la the Superman movies that he was in, right? But I gotta say, I really, really enjoyed this volume of No Man's Land in particular. And I gotta say, if, how many volumes are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If there's only 2 volumes out of the 7 that aren't great reads, Road to No Man's Land Volume 2 and No Man's Land Volume 3, which aren't great, and everything else is really, really good, that's a really good run of comics. That's like probably a year and a half of comic books, or 2 years in the Batman line, that they were phenomenal reads. Like, I can't imagine picking this up weekly and just like wanting to pick up all the Bat books because they were so good at the time. And this shows how good all these writers were. Chuck Dixon, Brubaker, Brubaker wasn't on yet. It was Greg Rucka on here. Devin Grayson, Denny O'Neil, all these guys. Jim Balent, Larry Hama writes some stuff in a couple of the other volumes. Who's writing Catwoman? John Ostrander, all doing great stuff. So No Man's Land, I gotta say, it's probably, I'm gonna reread all the bad events I got. I mean, Nightfall is good, my personal favorite, because of the Azrael stuff, Asbats. But in terms of don't want to put the book down, this beats Nightfall, seriously. So if you haven't read No Man's Land, or haven't read it in a while, go pick it back up and read it all the way through. It's a phenomenal read. I highly recommend it for any Batman fan out there. And I mean, it's no small feat. You're going to have to buy 3 omnibuses at some point to read all this if they never reprint these trades. Or, you're going to spend a lot of money trying to find these trades, physical copies, because some of them are available, some of them are not, and they're going to ask you to pay over retail price because they're out of print, because somehow that makes it more valuable. Don't get me started. But, yeah, I think it's a phenomenal book. So No Man's Land, 2 thumbs way up for volume 4 here. So thank you guys for watching. Let me know down below what you think of No Man's Land. Is it the best Bat event to come out of Batman since ever, like I'm saying it is? Or do you have a different favorite? So let me know down below what you think, and I'll see you guys next time here in the Funny Pages.